Shall we jump to more of the helpful
Yeah.
things and then some lessons learned, and then we'll wrap it up?
Yeah.
So I guess
Jinx.
Jinx. I was just going to say that that's pretty much our story. So I know we threw a couple of lessons learned or helpful and insightful things in the mix of the story, but now we're really going to shift for the last 10, 15 minutes here onto some practical things that people did that were helpful and some internal lessons learned that we've taken with us over the last few years.
Yeah. So I know, again, I obviously have a platform online, and so I shared as much as I could about my experience losing James. That was a directive from my grief therapist, partially because she originally had said to like journal, which I know Austin has done a lot of. But because I very quickly had a lot of anger, honestly, and a lot of anger about other people struggling through it and struggling through it silently, because right away some people had reached out saying that like they've been going through this but they've never been able to talk to anybody. So that's why I shared so much publicly. But what?
I was just going to say that your vulnerability and sharing opens up and gives permission to other people to be vulnerable and share.
Yeah.
So remember that. And Michelle chose to do that. And so if you have a similar experience, it might be your choosing to be open and vulnerable that then gives a bridge for other people to connect and express and heal.
Yeah. So what I was getting at with that though is because of that, I've gotten asked, I still get asked, it's almost 3 years later, I get asked probably monthly of, hey, my friend just lost a child. Do you have any suggestions on things that were helpful or not? So that's kind of why we're putting this list together. Obviously, I think the first thing that everybody thinks of is food, is you just take them dinner. We not only received a lot of physical food, but we got DoorDash and Grubhub and specific restaurants, gift cards and stuff. Those were super helpful. With the food, I will say one thing. Obviously, doing something is better than like nothing. So don't let the fear of getting it perfect keep you from doing something. The one thing I do always have to say though is a few of the meals we got like enough food for like 12 people.
Yeah, they were big.
It was a lot of food.
Yeah.
And
we don't want to waste.
Yeah.
And we also only had so much fridge space.
Yeah. So. There's only so much fridge space is most of the thing.
So just be aware of how much.
Yeah. Food. Just, you know, if they have, yes, we were a family of 6, but 4 of those were
little mouths,
6 and under, tiny people. Yeah. But with those little mouths, one of the things that I've taken people food for my entire life. Like that's like a huge part of particularly the church that we belong to, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's like a classic thing. Like, oh, somebody's got a problem, let's take them a meal. Like it's just the go-to. And especially like my mom was very good at that. She was very quick to see a need and very quick to go take some food. Something that I had never thought of though was easy snacks for the kids. And that was something that was very extremely helpful.
Bring a box of Chewy bars and some goldfish and some Capri Suns. Even if you don't bring a meal, just bring some of that stuff from pick the grocery store of your choice. And that's very helpful for us as parents. Yeah. Because again, the grief is there or the spouse is gone. Yeah. And you can easily say, go grab XYZ, and the kids aren't going to go, but I don't want to eat that. Yeah. It's easy food, and it's not meant to be forever. Yeah. But
even it's not like the healthiest option. We got a bag of apples and a bag of tangerines and just things that I didn't have to make. And that was really helpful. Easy food, easy meals. I know, again, just like the gift cards, even like my college roommates sent a box. What's that company? They like have the truck, the Swan thing, whatever. Like, so it was like, yeah. So it was like a lasagna that could be put in or whatever. Another friend sent the Real Home Chef. So it's like HelloFresh is like the more popular one. The Real Home Chef though is there's options. I love this company, but it's like it's easier, a lot easier, but still more fresh, and that was super helpful. The other thing that people did was super helpful was they brought activities again though that the kids could do themselves. So it was like those sticker by number books, stickers, bubbles, chalk. It was right around Easter time. So there was like an Easter, but I remember a lot of Easter baskets being brought. I mean, a lot, 4 of them. But again, just things that they could do by themselves. And that's not like, I don't want to paint a picture that like I didn't want to do anything with my kids. But capacity was very low. Again, planning a funeral was a lot of stuff to do. And then I was hurt, so getting around was hard. And it just was nice. Like, we still interacted with our kids a lot, but it was nice that they didn't have to have us to do things, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Another thing that helped was somebody bought me waterproof mascara. Mm-hmm. And that may sound like a silly thing. That's not something I had ever thought of. But like, I was crying a lot, I
just chose not to wear mascara.
But yeah. Another super helpful thing that my sister did was she offered to help find options for funeral clothes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then we I got an idea from our friends, Scott and Rochelle. We got a blanket, that one of those fabric blankets where you can just kind of cut the ends and then tie them. Fleece blanket.
Fleece, yeah.
Where a section of it we had cut and put and laid down in James's casket, and then the other bigger portion of it we kept. So it's our James blanket. So there's a part that is buried with him, and then there's the blanket that we have with us. That kind of is a connection between us, and so that's another either idea to help somebody do. I wouldn't do it for them, maybe. Again, know your audience. Some people might appreciate that, but we wanted a specific print. Like we wanted some. Yeah, we liked that. We went and chose it from Michael's or whatever it was.
Super soft.
Very soft, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So that was another thing that was helpful, is that we heard that from our friends. It was a little blanket that, again, parts with him and parts with us. For Michelle, there were lots of flowers and plants, as you know. Michelle likes those things. Just kidding. I like them too. They're beautiful. I'm just not as green thumb as she is. Mm-hmm. I think someone even offered to take the kids out for a day, like some neighbors and I think a family from church as well. That, hey, let's take the kids, and they just took them to the park or did whatever with them for a few hours.
I don't even remember where they went.
Yeah. And then
I did. So Austin did go back to Chicago for, I don't even remember how long you were gone after. A month,
2 months or something.
Yeah, 2 months or something.
2 months.
So a friend came to stay with me for a little bit, and my sisters came, and that was helpful. One of the things that.
But again, ask. Don't just show up.
Obviously, don't just show up.
Michelle wanted them to come.
Yeah, it was helpful not to be alone. It was helpful to have an extra hand. It was, again, I still couldn't like walk around pain-free. So it was helpful to have somebody around to help. I think they like cooked every meal and, you know, that kind of stuff. One of Austin's cousins sent a cleaner. And that is always the first thing I recommend. If you can afford it and you really want to help somebody, having somebody clean. And I think she even had said, she did ask. She was like, hey, I would like to do this for you. She even said, like, don't try to talk me out of it unless you don't want somebody in your home. It's what time
and how long.
Yeah.
Because you can do like an hour-long cleaning or a 4-hour cleaning.
Yeah. But she said, I just feel like you shouldn't have to clean toilets right now. And when I read that, I literally broke down to cry because, like, yeah, I don't. And I think if that cleaner hadn't come, I don't think I would have cleaned the toilets for a long time. Like, I just wouldn't have. It just is not, again, your capacity in energy is knocked down a little bit. Yeah. And that was like, I was like, that is such a practical and like really helpful thing to do. One thing I really want to talk about is pictures. So this was slightly a difficult thing for me to go through, which goes to one of the lessons of grace is required with grief on all fronts. This required me to have grace for other people. Some people sent pictures that they thought would be helpful. And they were not. I know for a fact for other people they are. I know other friends have those same pictures.
You mean paintings and drawings of artistic expressions of angels or of families with like a little baby.
Yeah. Christ with a baby.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Those types of artwork. Again, some were nice and others were not difficult. Helpful. And that'll be different for everybody.
Yeah. So what I learned is that you should ask. There were
again, grateful that everybody thought of us.
Right.
And we don't want things to go to waste or not be used or hung or, so it's
right. But I think you should
I would just offer that.
There are some beautiful, there are two that I love and cherish forever. I honestly, full disclosure, I gave away 3 or 4 of them because they just were painful. They're not wrong, but it's painful. Yeah. The people I gave them away to, one of them had a miscarriage, and that was exactly what she wanted. But I think
so. Again, it's just different for everybody.
It's just different, and I think it just goes back to I think there's nothing wrong with checking in and asking. That's what my sister-in-law did. One of the pictures that I love forever is it's a picture of Christ holding a woman, and she's very clearly sad, and he is carrying her. That for me, that's what I loved and needed because that's what was going on. You mentioned the card. The other thing, I think, well, let's go. So patients and leaders from church and the army. How about you talk about that?
Yeah. So I think another, again, it's not a physical gift or practical thing to do for somebody in that sense, but just think of the emotions and thoughts you have toward people who are in grief, that everybody grieves differently. Again, I was very blessed and lucky to have leaders both in the army and in the church because I was in leadership positions for both, right? Chaplains are a special staff for a commander, and in the church I had a specific responsibility that required meetings and different capacity, and there was patience from the leaders that I worked with, that hey, I'm grieving, and grief isn't time bound, right? And this is maybe a good bridge to the lessons learned, again, more for us that we can share with you. But grief is not time bound, and so it's been 2 weeks, or you're off leave and you're back to work, so things must be fine and normal. That maybe for some, But for others, it's, you have a good day one day and you have an awful day the next. And you have a good week one week, and then you have a really difficult and dark, depressing week the next. And so I chose to be pretty transparent with my leaders. That's my style. Just risk that vulnerability and say, hey, I'm at this space today, and this is what I think next week might look like, just because of where I'm at emotionally. Or, hey, my faith is really struggling right now in this aspect, and I know I'm supposed to be this chaplain and leader, and I don't know what to think of it. And then for a religious leader to sit down with me and talk for 30, 40 minutes after an already hour plus long meeting, and just take extra time with me, that kind of patience and love can go a long ways. So again, in your own capacity, you don't have to be religious, you don't have to be in a leadership position, but as a friend, as a brother, as a sister, as a, whatever your title or role is, just listening to somebody and being patient with them and loving them through it with wherever they're at, whether it's day one, a week into it, 3 months into it, a year later.
3 years
that's later. 3 years later. It's true. That is super helpful. Just letting people land their grief appropriately with you. That way it's not hidden, because it's, again, and I'll jump into lessons learned beyond just the things that people did that were helpful. And that's grief shared and grief witnessed is grief healing and integrating. Right? It can heal in silence, but from my experience and also some of the reading and different theory and things that I align with, grief heals in community. And so whether that's just you and your spouse, or you and your family, or your closest friends, or your parents, or whoever you let in on it, you need it to be witnessed to some degree, right? And Michelle mentioned writing on Instagram a lot and sharing a lot. I didn't do that very publicly for the first while. But then about a year or two into my journey, I did. I shared my week-long, that first week, essentially, or those 4 or 5 days, I can't remember all of what storyline I shared. And not that it has to be through social media, that was just a platform I used. But I shared more detail about my experience, and that was kind of freeing, but also it created a narrative for me to better grasp, right? Because some of it's just mumbled in my brain. And I know Michelle, I'm going to kind of jump from that now to another lesson learned, because that Michelle touched on, and that's journaling. She said I journaled a lot, but I want to put a little asterisk by that because it's not journaling in the normal sense. People think journal and it's like, oh, I got to get out a spiral bound notebook and sit there and write my thoughts for 5 minutes at night. No, it's a note in my phone titled James, and I pull it out still. It is a lot less frequent now, but I would pull it out, my phone, open the note, write my thought and feeling of whatever was going on, whether it was a really dark and depressing grief moment, or it was a spiritual, enlightening, revelatory, faith-filling moment about James, or about loss, or about death, or about life, or whatever it was related to that grief. And at first it was probably multiple times a week, every day almost. And then it was every week. And then it was almost once a month. And now it's this year, I guess, now that we're at the end of 2023, a lot less frequent, but I still write in it. I think I wrote in it just last month. I don't know if I have in December, but I know I wrote something last month. Just another insight. And so that is what I mean by journaling. And it's not wrong if you do the spiral bound, write your feelings out for 5 minutes. I just know, especially for men, that might not connect. Yeah. They're like, oh, I don't want to journal. And it's like, no. Write out your thoughts and feelings. Give it a place to be. You don't have to share it with anybody. Yeah. But again, it really helps you think through, process, and let go of whatever's stewing inside your heart and mind. Or not stewing, but
there
in your heart and mind. Yeah.
And for me, it was helpful that it was on the phone, because sometimes it happened, like something came to mind that would be good to write down when I was at the grocery store. And so at first I didn't do it. And then with talking with Austin and my therapist, they're like, well, why are you, like, it's just going to it is going to stew in your mind. and take over.
Then it turns into stewing. Yeah. What I meant is more it was just a thought or a feeling or an overwhelming emotion, and it gives it a space to be.
Yeah. Instead of like
and turning into
fogging up your head.
Fogging and festering and turning everything upside down.
But you don't have to like judge it. I know the first few times I tried to do it after us had recommended, I was like, but like it's not making sense. When I'm writing down isn't making sense. It's gibberish, or it's just like 3 words and then 4 other and then 2, and it's like it's not a complete sentence, or it was something that I didn't want to hold on to and be true. I didn't want it to exist in my grief journey. I didn't want that to be, I didn't want to be that angry. I didn't want to be, I didn't want to believe whatever was in my head. And I felt like if I wrote it down, then it made it true. And that's
difficult.
Yeah, difficult, but it's the opposite. And it's really helpful to write it down.
Yeah.
Which I guess can go easily into the next lesson learned, that God can take your anger. I know, or I don't even remember how, like what day or whatever it was, but I remember Austin asking me how I was feeling, and it turned into like the discussion of I was afraid of getting angry because I didn't feel like I should be angry with what I know and what I believe and my faith in the fact that I believe that Christ has atoned for not just the sins of the world, but for the fallenness of the world, and that it all can be redeemed. And because of covenants that we've made, I know that James is our son, and he will be our son forever. So I felt like because I knew all of that, I shouldn't be angry, and I shouldn't be angry at God because he is so good. But Austin said I wasn't letting myself go through that stage of grief and through that emotion. And I think I wasn't trusting that God could take it.
Yeah. And it's, I don't think uncommon, and this is whatever your faith or your religious belief is, for there to be shame or fear surrounding that interaction with God or the higher being or the holy, however you define him or her. And so to me, allowing yourself to truly express, because it's not that it's not there. Again, this is from my faith perspective. God knows your heart. So, I mean, you can't hide your anger from him, like as much as you want to try, but it can feel scary, right? And personality, if you want to get into personality theory, different personalities will also start to spiral and like, oh my goodness, how can I be angry at God? Right? And that, again, other people and other might not struggle with it, and they'll really lean on the Psalms and other scripture where it's like, man, everyone's angry at God and they get over it and God gets over it and we're good to go, and it comes easily and naturally. But then again, personality wise, it might be a lot more scary for others to enter that phase and stage of their grief and really confront it and allow themselves to live in it faithfully. Again, it's not
just, I was scared of not being able to get out of it. I thought that if I dove into the anger, I was never going, because of how deep and painful this loss was and is. I was afraid I was never going to be able to get out of it if I let myself go there.
Yeah.
So I was scared of it.
Yeah. So I think, again, a lesson learned for you and your spiritual religious journey and connection, allow yourself to emote to your God faithfully, and you can be angry and faithful at the same time. So that is like a plaque and shirt and everything.
because you can. Yeah. And I think I don't know about everybody else.
And it's sorry.
Oh, I don't know about everybody else, because I think it's difficult sometimes when you hear people talking about like definitively about like, well, we, growing up, I never heard this message. So that means that like the church you went to or the gospel is trying to portray that message. But I feel like it's like we all have, because I say this mostly because I have a sister we're super close in age. You can argue we had the exact same upbringing, and yet we have very different stories of the lessons and events that happened in our life. Do you know what I mean? So I think it'd be unfair for me to say that in the church, in church and in Christianity, we never say this or we never do that. Do you know what I mean? Like to speak definitively.
Yeah.
I think.
Or to say, well, yeah, they did that in the scripture, right, but that was a prophet or that was a whoever, and they, of course, they were able to, but I can't. I'm not X, Y, and Z. Right.
So for me, up until this point in my life, it had very much the messages I was receiving, I think is a more fair thing to say. The ones I was internalizing, at least, was that because of the truth I have and because of Christ, the tragedies of life shouldn't faze me. I guess. And honestly, some people did have, I think what they were attempting to be helpful messages at church and online and in letters, messages that they thought would be helpful. And they weren't, And so for me, it was like this learning of that just because Christ has suffered all things and God does love us, and there is this amazing plan for us to be with our son again and for all to be redeemed, that doesn't mean that there isn't longing and loss and anger and that those feelings are okay. He doesn't, I think God wants us to feel.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't want us to not feel.
Yeah. And I think part of it is feeling them for a time.
Yeah.
And so, again, years later, I can look back and see that I was hurting, right? And that's where a lot of that, it feels unfair. It feels a lot of different things. And my faith grew. I allowed my faith to grow into where it is today. And if I hadn't allowed myself to really journey and experience and emote and express myself to God in those ways, I don't think my faith would have grown in the same way.
Yeah.
So, and that's again more of the religious aspect of lessons learned. Mm-hmm. And again, I would invite whoever's listening or watching, right, wherever you're at in your faith or your religious perspective, how it applies to you, I'd encourage you to think about it, right? Explore it. And if it doesn't, keep it in your back pocket for when tragedy strikes in your life. Yeah. It's usually a matter of when, not if. And if tragedy strikes in somebody else's life and you view them as faithful or unfaithful, or they're religious or not religious, just remember a lot of these big life questions start to surface when tragedy hits, and especially when it hits so close to the heart. So, again, I think going along the journey is just part of the process. So, another thing that we learned that I know Michelle wanted me to talk about would be called bibliotherapy. It's kind of the fancy word for it, but essentially reading good things for therapeutic output, right? There's therapy where you go and talk to somebody, but then there's also, let me read a book that will help me learn something and emote and broaden my perspective. So what I mean by that would be, for me, it was the book On Grief and Grieving. There's a lot of different books about grief. There's a lot of different grief theory. And I wanted to learn more about what that experience was. And that book's really good. in that it has a lot of different vignettes and stories about people's loss. And it goes through Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief, which aren't linear. But off the top of my head, if I can recall them: anger, denial, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And again, it's not that, oh, I went through these 5 and my grief is over. It's, there will be seasons of my life where I am bargaining, thinking I would do anything to have him with me. I wish it was this way and not that way. And if I could have only X, Y, and Z, then this wouldn't have happened. Or there's that depression. Again, super, super bummed and sad and crying. And despite all the blessings in my life, despite the gospel perspective, despite everything, I just seem like all I'm looking into is a dark room, right? Or that acceptance. Like, okay, yeah, I get that my son is dead and he's buried and he's not with me. And I accept that. But then you revert back into, I'm super angry about that. And now you're angry again. And so again, the grief can just be this big, long, loopy journey between all of those different stages. But for me, it was therapeutic in that sense of calming and healing and helpful to read a book. And that one was on grief and grieving. And Michelle read books for herself as well. That was only one of the ones that I read.
Mm-hmm. We'll share a list.
And
yeah.
Yes.
Right in the notes.
And we got some books for the kids too, that we read to them that were just more about death and grief at a kid level to help them understand their loss.
Yeah.
We also helped the kids talk with their military family life counselors, MFLICs, at the school, right? Because it's a big loss for the kids too.
Made sure the teachers knew.
Yeah, made sure the teachers knew. And even when we moved, we made sure the new teachers knew, like, hey, I know it's been 18 months and now we're in a new space, but just for your awareness, this might come up. And it did.
And it did. Yeah. So we let the teachers know, and we let the teachers know that if they're struggling at school, I want our child to be able to call me.
Yeah.
That was clear. And the kids there were
2 or 3 times.
Yeah. A few times. For the older girls especially. Where they called, and like one of them, it was like 18, I think it was as we were approaching the 2 years, like 18 months in, and one of our daughters just called and she said, I don't know why I'm sad, but I started thinking about James and I'm really sad right now. And we just talked on the phone for a handful of minutes, and then I asked her, like, do you want me to come pick you up and maybe you can go back after lunch or something, or we can just kind of take a day? And she said, no, I think I just wanted to talk to you and now I'll go back. But that does go into something that I wanted to talk about, especially something that people ask that we talk about on the podcast, is how to talk to your kids about grief. Because I think, at least in my experience of what people have asked me, a lot of people think that we have to protect our kids from it. And we took a very different approach. Yeah.
No, we were both very open about the loss and about our own grief. We let ourselves grieve in front of our kids. Maybe not the full wailing cry. Yeah. And maybe not the cursing of anger. But some of the tears were definitely like, and Michelle would sit there and we'd let ourselves cry and be like, well, I'm thinking about Jane, I'm a little sad. Yeah. Or, our kids would say something and then we would listen, right? Not, oh, well, and give them a silver lining or platitude line.
Yeah.
It's really the basics of compassion and empathy, which is allowing somebody to state what they're experiencing, validating it in that you don't have to repeat it back like a parrot, but
that's really
you can ask a clarifying question of like, it sounds like you're saying you're sad. And that almost might sound like it's beneath them as a 10-year-old or whatever age the kid is. But that's part of what helps validate what they're experiencing. It's, I'm feeling very sad, is what they'll usually respond with. And then, like Michelle just said, that's really hard. I imagine it's difficult, and letting them have 20 minutes of sorrow or 5 minutes of a snuggle just to let them feel loved and comforted. Yeah, so again, it'll come and go in waves like it does for adults, but for kids, and they'll have questions, and you don't have to have all the answers.
Yeah.
Right.
But you also don't have to like shy away from the answers that you do have. I don't think you have to sugarcoat it for kids.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people, I think the gut reaction is like, again, just give the platitudes and the silver linings. But I think the kids can handle the explanation of like my kids have asked me, how did James die? It's a really hard conversation to have. It's hard for me to talk about, right? Like that is painful. I could have dismissed them. I wanted to dismiss them, honestly. But because we were taking the approach, and I feel like it is healthiest for them to not be dismissed and then to have the answers, we went over some of the things that has to happen for a baby to grow and to be delivered healthily. And I explained like we actually don't have the answers. All of those tests came back inconclusive, which apparently isn't uncommon.
But we didn't use the lines of, well, he's sleeping.
Yeah.
Or he's not here, or he's just with God.
Yeah.
It was, well, to live, you have to have a heartbeat and breathing.
Yeah.
And he doesn't.
Never.
Just like, I mean, and people will explain the death of a grandma or grandpa differently, or a sibling. My brother died from cancer a few years ago, so their uncle died. And so we've talked about death, and that it's a scary thing for adults to think about, let alone kids. So you don't want to traumatize your kids, which we understand. And is it wrong to tell them the truth at their level?
Yeah.
Like, hey, feel your heartbeat. When that doesn't happen, you can't be around, right? That's when the body, then we can go spiritual and say that's when the spirit leaves the body. And that's where James is with God, and that his spirit's still there, but his body isn't with us. So we won't see him again until we're also dead. Yeah. Right. And again, everyone, to your level of faith or belief or understanding of physical life or spiritual life, to me, just, being open and honest and not dismissive or silver lining or hiding some of those things can be helpful.
Yeah. And like, I'm not gonna pretend that it makes it so it's all okay. Like it is still difficult. They've lost a handful of family members since then, and I will be honest, their reactions have been different. So both of my grandmas passed away, and we were able to, because of where we were stationed at the time, we were able to go to both of those funerals. Their reactions were different and more filled with more sorrow and grief than their cousins were. I think part of that is because they are more acquainted with grief. And they have had more discussions and questions. But while there were more tears, they also gave answers to their cousins. And not just dark answers. Do you know what I mean? Like, they weren't just like, well, their heart stopped beating. They were able to give comfort. So I think
again, that compassionate, it's okay to be sad. Or I feel sad too.
Yeah.
Right. Like, they come alongside the grief, and we're able to be present.
Yeah.
So
I think we've kind of mentioned it, but I think like the biggest lesson learned for me is that the best thing you can do with somebody for a loss, but really anything, is just understanding that you can't fix it, and you can just sit with them. I think some of the biggest blessings for both of us are the times where people just sat with us and heard us. I think the best moments that we've been able to be there for each other are when we just sat with each other, because we've kind of, like, most of the time, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but from my perspective, most of the times it seemed like we've taken turns.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it's like, okay, right now I'm feeling good, and he has a super hard moment, and I I'm just gonna be there for him, and it's like we take turns or something. But also with other people, and then with our kids, like we can't. I mean, gosh darn it, June still has moments. She just had one the other day.
Like, yeah, no, and that's but just really hard for that age.
Yeah. But yeah, I think if
it's really the question of choosing to go through the experience together.
Yeah.
While allowing each other to have their own individual experience.
Yeah.
Okay. Everyone grieves differently, but to allow husband, wife, father, mother, sister, brother, whatever your family position or role is, you're going to grieve differently, but to allow each other the space to do it openly with each other and to connect and communicate about it. That to me has been one of the greatest blessings, is choosing to go through it together. Because it's also bound us together in a what we call trauma bonding, right? So yeah, and I think, did we land the plane? We're done.
Let's pause for a second. June, is that you? I know we're taking a lot longer. Can we have a few more minutes, or do you need something?
What else do you want to talk about though? We talked about it.
Okay, finish up. We're almost done, and then we'll go. Okay, I'll edit that out. I do think I'm going to turn it into 2 episodes. It would just be super long.
The story and then the lessons learned.
Yeah. With that last thing, I think that's like the biggest lesson, at least for a couple, is that, like, the stats are fairly well known, right? Like that a family that goes through grief, significant loss, there's a high divorce rate. I understand why it's so high. That's not going to happen to us. I don't want to scare us.
Zinger. No, I'm just kidding.
It's not going to happen to us, but having gone through what we've gone through, I get why. But I think, again, not an expert, but from my experience, I think the difference is making the decision early on. Literally, it might have happened like once the night he came home, but I have a vivid memory of being at the hospital and Austin looking at me and saying, like, can we do this together? Can we just decide right now that we're going to do this together? This is going to be miserable. Can we do this together? And that was a decision that was made very firmly in that moment. And then there were tiny ways where we continued to choose that on a daily basis. Sometimes, some days it was a minute basis of just like tiny decisions of, okay, for me, I have 2 options here. An option that is leading me towards doing it with him, or an option that's leading me towards doing it by myself. And sometimes, like, not every decision was perfect, but I think I got at least 75% of them, like.
Well, it's not that you can't have your privacy in your grief.
Right.
And if you want to not separate like legal separation, but separate from each other emotionally.
Yeah.
You have to allow yourself to be vulnerable. Mm-hmm. You have to allow yourself to be transparent.
You have to forgive each other.
Forgive each other for the difficult moments or the falling short or whatever perception or reality might be, in the days, weeks, months, years. And again, that's, for us, it's an eternal perspective. When we chose to get married, we chose to get married for time and eternity. And that really this life is just about growing through these experiences. We didn't ask for this one. don't want it, and it's what we have, and so we choose to either stay together and stick with each other and grow through it and have really miserable moments together and witness each other's traumatic, difficult, grieving, episodes, and also celebrate with each other and let each other in on our sacred, spiritual, faith-filling, and growing moments. That on both ends of the spectrum, this tragedy has opened up. So that, I think, is really one of the biggest and best lessons learned, is to make your choices, love your choices, right? And
choose each other.
Yeah.
Okay, I feel like I didn't last one.
The last thing.
Last one.
And then another last thing.
No, this really is the last thing. I just realized looking at the list. One of the biggest lessons and my biggest urges, if you have gone through anything remotely close to this, is to get help. And there's multiple avenues for that. I think.
Right. Sorry. We've been talking about this for a long time, so I also forgot about that.
Yeah. That there's grief therapy, there's talk therapy, but there's also other therapies. And before this, I just thought about talk therapy, but for me, there were multiple things going on, and with the things that I was going through, talk therapy wasn't enough. And I needed to learn about things like EMDR, and I had to try those, and had to try them and be a little unsuccessful with some people, and then try with a different therapist and a different not technique, it was still an EMDR, but a different person. Moving multiple times didn't necessarily help with that, and that required some continuing effort and support from Austin, and sometimes Austin kicking my butt and saying, you have to go get therapy. Not literally, but just hey, we just moved, but it's been 3 months and you really do need to go find somebody. Yeah. But they're it's not just, if you have a chaplain, go talk to your chaplain, but that's not the only option. Or talking to friends is not the only option. There's multiple
really, it's finding the best option for you.
Yeah. And that requires trying things. Just saying
trying and restarting and doing it again. And,
But I, just from a personal experience, this kind of loss and medical trauma and can put you it can literally feel like hell on earth. And I don't like swearing, but that's just the only, I don't think it's swearing in this capacity, but it's the only way to describe it. And it can feel like there is no escaping it. But I just want to help you know that there are things I that are shockingly efficient and helpful.
Well, I would argue you can escape it. I don't think you'll be a very healthy individual. And so what I hear you offering is there are ways to, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
You can escape your pain. And there's a lot of people who numb and self-medicate and do things that in the long run aren't healthy and helpful.
Yeah.
Either striving or successfully escaping it and evading it and not addressing it. What Michelle's offering is there are healthy and helpful ways to address your grief and your pain, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and to find your people. The right physical therapist, the right psychologist, the right chaplain or religious leader, the right friend, the right family member, all of it at the right place and the right time for you. And the right books, the right songs, the right podcasts, the right apps. I mean, really, the resources are nearly endless to help your way through the grief and the pain, and to not try and escape or evade it.
Yeah.
And that's really where you'll become your healthiest and wholest self again.
Yeah. I just want you to remember that there's hope.
Oh yeah.
It can very easily feel hopeless. At least it did for me. It still does sometimes. But there's hope. There's hope. And I hope this was helpful. And I can't speak for him, but I'm always here. You guys know.
Yep.
The
We'll say emails and questions or anything that come through the Waiting Warriors that I can try and help answer or address. I'd be happy to. And I would also
for Austin.
Yeah. I would also add this. I mean, while probably 2 podcast episodes, we're looking at an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes worth of discussion. There are tons of details and tons of things that were left out, both intentionally and unintentionally, just because there is so much to this kind of experience, some of which is deeply personal and sacred, and some of which is just because I don't think you want to hear me talk for 3 hours. I don't know. But if there are further details or questions that could be helpful, I don't know what they are, but in your awareness and in your experience, let us know.
Yep. Always open. So I hope this was helpful. I hope at least hearing the lessons learned and the things that other people did to help us was helpful. In the show notes, I will, and I think I'm going to make a blog post about it, of like songs that have been helpful to listen to. I want to share some of the books that Austin wrote or Austin read, and the ones I did, because I am drawing a complete blank and I should have thought better to think that I would remember, and I should have had it right in front of me. But we'll share those in the show notes. And yeah, I wish you guys the best. I hope you know that if you have experienced something like this or ever do, I just hope you know that you're not alone, that you do not have to go through this alone. If there is ever any advocating help that you need, I'm always here. If you need somebody to call or I've had multiple people send like the voice messages. If you don't want to text it out and you just want to speak angrily to somebody who understands, I've been able to do that for a handful of people. But you're not the only one, and you're not alone in this.